As Joel said, I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. I'm new. I've only been in Charlotte for 2 years, but I've been doing research in, as he said, Burkina Faso this is my 10th year. I'm very excited. So I'm going to go back in the spring, maybe in about 5 weeks. In less than 2 hours, I hope to prepare you to interpret some, not all, of the arts in the 2 African galleries we have here at the Mint Randolph. I'm going to present a few objects, and I have a lot of material in my slideshow. We're not going to get to it all, so I've sort of organized it by theme and by material. I'm going to give you information and supplementary images here in the auditorium. I'll spend 40-45 minutes doing that, and then we'll go upstairs to the galleries, and I have more material prepared to show you other objects, or you can ask me questions in the galleries, which might be more effective than doing it here, unless you have specific questions about the supplementary images I'm going to show you. So it's going to be a lot, and I don't expect you to retain everything. What I hope to give you is enough background to help you with your approach to interpreting the arts of Africa for the visitors to the Mint. So, to that end, if I don't do it, remind me. For each object, I have a kind of series of themes that we can think about for each object, and that should help you talk about them in relationship to one another, how they compare and how they contrast, but also to help you get a bit more familiar talking about those objects in comparison to other objects at the Mint in different galleries that are not necessarily African objects. But by far and large, colonialism didn't actually last very long, but of course it had an enormous impact, and I'll talk about some of those relationships in regards to the objects in a few minutes. Today, the continent of Africa is home to 1 billion people. It's about 1/6 of the population of God's green earth. So there's about 16% of the world population is on the African continent. It has the highest genetic diversity of any continent on the planet. Meaning, because people come from Africa, humans come from Africa, we've spent the longest period of time there, which has resulted in the most genetic, linguistic, and cultural diversity. Okay, I'm an expert in West African masquerade. That's my specialty. Fortunately for us, almost all, I think all but one of the objects in the collection that are on display here come from West and Central Africa. These are the most highly collected areas, and they're the areas with which most Africanist art historians are really familiar, so don't worry, you're in good hands. So while my specialty is masquerade, I'm going to focus on that, and then we'll talk some more about some of the figural sculpture and the textiles. So, given the genetic, linguistic, and cultural variety on the continent, there's only a handful of objects upstairs. What we have is a cherry-picked sampling. So we don't have all of the arts of the continent, right? We have a kind of sampler. So we're going to not necessarily have a comprehensive view of African art, but one that's dependent on the specific objects in the galleries. So I'm going to, well, we have an array of time periods and cultures, so I'm going to give you some context for each object, okay? And we're going to start with masquerade. And the reason is because, as one of the labels says in the galleries, masquerade is considered the quintessential African art, right? It's what we think of when we think of African art. And that's for very good reason. However, only maybe 10% of African societies mask. So while we think of masquerade absolutely as being African art, right? That's the good stuff. I mean, I think so. Only 10% of African societies actually have masquerade. So again, we're cherry picking here, okay? In terms of it being a quintessential African art, that is in part because masquerade encompasses all of the arts. It encompasses sculpture, music, costume, dance, poetry, right? Women participate, men participate, young, old, all categories of society in public entertainment masquerades. allow full participation by everybody. So this is why it's the sort of quintessential art. And we'll talk about, there are many, many, many exceptions to that rule. So let's get moving. This is the Chiwara headpiece. And this is the headpiece, I'm going to talk about these as if you walk in from the pre-Columbian and Mexican rooms. So when you walk into the African galleries, this is one of those objects up on the shelf in the back of that first room. And it's up here high. So this is a Chihuahua crust mask. And this one is based on a certain species of antelope. Though, and I'll show you in a second, Chihuahua often incorporate the features of other animals, and it's very important to what Chihuahua is. Chihuahua, as a term, refers to a mythic being. So it's not a real being, but a mythic being. It's understood as being a mythic entity that was half man, half beast. And that half man, half beast, in the way back, taught man how to farm. And taught man how to farm like a beast. And that's I love it because it's a true translation. Wara is a clawed animal, like a lion or an antelope, and Chi is to farm. So it's to farm like a beast, and it's a very sort of contemporary reference because what it really means is to farm hunched over, without drinking water, without ever stopping, hoeing and hoeing and hoeing so that your friends and families and neighbors can all survive, because Chihuahua comes out of agricultural societies that were dependent on subsistent farming, okay? So to farm like a beast is to be a champion, to be noble, to engender food. Millet is the main crop, but to engender food for your entire society. So Chihuahua is to farm like a beast, and it is a masquerade practice. It's much less common today than it used to be. So this is, in the literature, this is often talked about as decline. That this masquerade practice is on the decline because it's done less and less now. There is some evidence that this is true, but not everywhere. Some of the reasons for the decline are the introduction of a yoked plow, right, an animal that can pull the plow, the introduction of religions of the book, like Islam, and then seasonal labor, so young men going into cities to go do work, not maybe taking the time to learn how to do the masquerade, right, to invest in that. However, in some areas, the masquerade still survives because the areas are too hilly to have a yoked plow hoe that area, so it has to be done by hand. And the earth gets incredibly dry before, and you have to hoe the earth before the rainy season comes. And it's incredibly dry, and it's very, very difficult, back-breaking work. And it is the work of young men. It's basically only young men can do this. And so Chihuahua was this dance that would exhort men to farm like a beast, and it would honor the mythical Chihuahua who taught men how to farm. I should say men and women. Today, what you see is that Chihuahua has become more of an entertainment, and it's a competition in order to sort of get young men to hoe better and to do their job better. It's also a charity. It's an association. So if you have a farm and you are widowed or something like that, that association, the Chihuahua Association, will help you get labor and get people to help you on your farm so that you too can have a good harvest. And then it's also a charity, I guess it's more like a clinic or a medical service, in that members of the Chihuahua Association are also adept at healing things that are important to agriculture, like when people are in the fields and they get snake bites by poisonous snakes. So Chihuahua can help you heal those snake bites, and that's true. So let's look at the objects themselves. This is a very old, a little over 100-year-old photograph by Leo Frobenius. And you can see how the mask sits on the head. It sits on top of the head. There's a little basket that it's kind of tied to that sits on the head. And so the mask is right there on the crest. The body is raffia fiber, and it's like a brown raffia fiber, dark brown, that sort of connects the body to the earth. And there are these two figures here with staffs or canes in the front, because they are acting like antelopes, right, as though they are four-legged creatures. You can see there's a band here, right, and then there are all these men bent over hoeing. It is truly back-breaking work. So they are here performing, so masks are performed. There's music, there's sound, there's interaction, there's men and women. This is the chorus of women here, and this is the band here. And it's exhorting farmers, and so it's exhorting farmers sonically, right, orally, performatively, and visually. So it's exhorting farmers to tear at the earth, to work bent, rolled over, to, like an oryx or certain kinds of antelope, to not stop and drink, to have hope, to pierce the earth, to engender millet, to have your fields free of weeds, to never forget hard work, and because of your hard work and accomplishments, we will never forget you, which is a lovely idea. If successful farming is man's highest achievement, Chiwara exhorts characteristics such as those embodied in a man who spends his entire day from sunrise to sunset, bending over his hoe, never straightening up, not even for a moment, either to rest, drink, eat, hoeing with joy, perseverance, and pride. Okay, you get it, yeah? All right. Over time, however, there have been a number of changes in Chiwara masks and Chiwara practices. Some of these, so if you look at the headpieces in particular, which are probably not super easy to see, there's a lot of differences. The differences between headpieces is not only over time, but over different areas. So unfortunately, we only have one Chiwara on display here, but there are an enormous variety of Chiwara. You can see that some of them have the hooked horn here in the back. Some of them have a straight horn. I'll talk about that in a second. This one's horizontal. The antelope is actually oriented horizontally. And you can see some differences in posture and costuming. So this is the mint Chiwara on the left. And then this one on the right is from a museum in Paris. And it was collected, the one on the right, the red one, was collected in 1931. And I show that to you because if you notice when you go up into the African galleries, it's a lot of brown. It's a lot of brown and a lot of black. And that is not 100% the way those objects would have necessarily been seen in context. In some cases, Chiwara masks are painted in very bright colors, which is sort of antithetical, I think, to how we often think of African art as being old and antique and brown and dusty. That's not often the case. Often people who mask want their masks to be bright and new looking, because otherwise it's just embarrassing. And then you can see that there's a difference in technique here, where these horns slope back, yes, and these horns are erect. That's a gender difference. This is a male Chiwara. They come out in pairs, as you might have seen. This is a male Chiwara. Those horns are the horns of a roan antelope. This is a female Chiwara. It has the horns of an oryx. An oryx is a large other kind of antelope, and it is appreciated because it mimics ideal womanhood. It has a 9-month gestation period, motherhood being very important for reproduction of society, of course. And female oryx are loyal. Males can have 2 females with them. It's quite common. And if the male is, say, shot, the female will stay. If the female is shot, the male will run. I know. Yeah. They can also go a long time without water. The male antelopes, the roan antelopes, have a zigzag gait, which is also appreciated. So there's all of these sort of features one sees in animals that one wants to see in humans, right? So we're relating animal symbolism to humans. You might also notice that our example here in the mint has no body. All you have is the thing that sits on the head, right? Which is incredibly unlike what you see here, okay? So what we have is a decapitation. We have a decapitated head. It is still, and it is an object. And that is very much not how it is experienced here. One does not inspect the Chiwara in a dance, right? That's not how one engages with the Chiwara at a dance, right? Here in the museum, we have a different experience than one would have with a mask, okay? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is the way it is, okay? So this is what we have to work with. So one of the things that we can talk about with this work, even though we don't have the whole mask or the whole experience, is we can talk about femininity in this case. Not only because of the erect horns of the oryx, but also, anyone? Baby on its back? So it has the little one, and it's on the back of the antelope, which is, by the way, a human trait. Antelopes don't carry their young on their backs. So again, we're relating ideal feminine traits that we see in animals to humans by putting the antelope on the back, right? The baby on the back, I should say. You might also notice, it's a little hard to see, but right there, jewelry. Often these objects are adorned, and they're adorned with jewelry, beads, fibers, even like metal necklaces and things like that. So one of the things I'd also like to point out is often, particularly with masquerade, but other things as well, objects don't necessarily have what we would think of as a final form, complete. And the artist says, perfect, for the ages, right? That's not how that happens. Because if that mask is going to be, say, repainted for next year and then readorned with a whole new costume, the object doesn't really have a final form, okay? So again, it's adorned like a female, it wears the baby on the back like a female, it has those erect horns like an oryx, and by the way, men hoe the fields, but women tend to them. So women participate in agriculture here equally to men. Okay, so they're very much appreciated, and if we think of agriculture as a kind of reproductive act, then we can also think of human reproduction as being analogous to Chiwara. Now I'm comparing this to Como, which is just below it, below and to the left, I think, in a case. Now this does not have visual clarity, right? The form itself, the sort of outline, the silhouette of the form is clear, but the sort of what it's made of is not. And even what it represents is not so clear. That's deliberate. This is a Como mask. This sits on the head like a baseball hat. I don't have a picture of the masquerade itself. But this was made for probably what we call a power association. It's an association of men only men, sorry ladies. It's called Como, the association itself. And Como associations, by far and large, are meant to enact change in the world. And it, how do I explain this? In communities that have Como, or communities that participate in Como, there is an understanding of what we would call a kind of life force. It's called Nyama, N-Y-A-M-A, Nyama. And Nyama is the energy of action. All living things have energy, yes? And we know from our sort of scientific point of view that energy never dissipates, right? You can only move it from one place to another. It doesn't ever disappear. It's never just gonna go poof. So Bamana, Sunufo folks who have Como believe the same thing. And trees have Nyama, energy. People have Nyama, energy. Speech has Nyama. When you speak, you bring energy into the world, okay? And Como chapters try and harness and control that energy. And they do it through a number of ways. A Como chapter will be headed or run by a blacksmith. And blacksmiths are can be incredibly powerful people if they're really good at their jobs and they're knowledgeable. So if a Como chapter is headed by a blacksmith who has his own, we can think of it as a recipe for how to harness and control that energy. He takes that energy and puts it into the head of the Como. And that's what all of that stuff on top is. It is all the remnants of life. So, there's a wooden armature. A sculptor carves, or blacksmith carves, the shape, the basic form. Onto that is added, based on the recipe of that particular blacksmith, sacrifice. And that sacrifice takes a number of different forms. Earth, beer, spit, leaves, blood, and animal parts. And I mean animal parts. These are real horns. So there's a wooden armature, and then there's actual animal parts. And that blacksmith has to go out and kill that animal to get those parts. Why? Because it has to have a life force that will be added to the head of the Como. It's a very kind of clear understanding of what energy is. So you kill the animal and you take a real part and you add it to the Como, to the head of the Como, with other things, with other kinds of sacrifices. And that makes the basic form. And you're not really, as a viewer, supposed to know what that recipe is. And here's why. Knowledge available to anybody is useless. It's both in line with and antithetical to how we think about knowledge, right? Like I'm an educator, right? I want people to learn things. That's good. However, there are times really important knowledge, dangerous knowledge, that is not for everybody. That's why we have military secrets. It's not for everybody. And so if your knowledge can really affect change in the world, real change, that's something that you can't just hand over to any neophyte. So even members of the chapter of that association won't know necessarily the recipe for the Como head, okay? So over time, this Como head has additional sacrifice. So over time, more and more sacrifice, usually in the form of like blood and beer and more earth. And that's not just any old clump of earth, right? There's a recipe for this, which I don't know, will be added to the object. And so the object has what we call an aesthetic of accumulation, right? And you can see that now. If I say aesthetic of accumulation, you see that the sacrifice is built up onto the object. You can't even see the wooden armature anymore, can you? Because it's so much sacrifice on top of the object. Now, so you have all the sacrifice on the object, and the object itself is powerful. Because of that, it has all of this energy invested into it. So then when it is performed at night, in private, no women. Okay? At night, in private, only association members are present, or other members of other associations, and no women are allowed. Okay? When it's performed, that energy is released. And it's released in a controlled way. Now this is how we've talked about Como for years and years and years. However, new research says that this is actually, not quite metaphor, but this is really the enactment of politics, of men who are harnessing energy and affecting change in the world through their amassing of knowledge and their ability to have followers in a chapter. Right? So we can think of this in multiple ways, as a kind of spiritual revelation, as a form of leadership. We can think of this as aesthetic, right? The aesthetic of accumulation. We can also think about this as a kind of political gesture. How does one gain a following? By having knowledge that nobody else has. That's how. Right? By using that knowledge to affect change in the world. Ideally, Como chapters use Como to affect positive change. So they would do it for things like if there is a severe drought or a spate of horrific infant mortality, something like that, you would bring out Como in particular. Okay? There's next to this object, Kono. Whoa, with an N like Nancy. So the first one is Como, like Mary. The second one is Kono, like Nancy. And this is the really long one that's in the gallery. Also like a baseball cap. The way it's oriented here is not how it would be worn, but it's close. And this one is really similar to Como, yeah? I mean, in the sense that it's the same kind of baseball cap, helmet mask. It has that long maw, kind of gaping mouth. Has a little ball on top. That's a site of sacrifice. And it's a little bundle of medicines, and it has its own recipe. However, what it doesn't have is real animal parts, like horns, right? This is a wooden armature with sacrifice on it, okay? So we think of Kono as being like Como, but having a cleaner aesthetic, right? Less accumulation, although there is some, for sure. And in part that's because Kono is often washed. So you'll, after a time, the Kono will be washed and a lot of that accumulation will be sloughed off, deliberately so, okay? Kono is used for similar reasons, but it doesn't have that fearsome aesthetic of Como. And you can see this in a number of ways. One, it doesn't have the real animal parts. Oh, by the way, those those horns are put on that headpiece anti-naturalistically. The horns should go back, but they're going forward. So that is it's a kind of malevolent, weird composite animal. It's not real, right? And it's backwards. So you have that here, you have this coming out, but that's not real horns. And notice the mouth. See how this mouth is open and clean, there's no teeth? That one has teeth, and it's a little bit more closed. I mean, it's open, but it's a little more closed, like it's chomping. Okay? So this one is a little bit less fearsome, and it's less composite. It has less of an aesthetic of accumulation, yeah? Okay. So we can ask ourselves, or ask visitors, what do you think these represent and why? Get people to hopefully talk about those horns and that aesthetic of accumulation. What does that mouth mean? And it's literally like the better to eat you with, okay? It's also a reference to the power of speech and all of that energy that comes out of the power of speech. We can think about what materials were used to create these mask headpieces and why. Why? Because of all that energy that we're adding to them. And the more energy, the more powerful the object, yeah? And then how do their surfaces differ? So we can look a little bit more closely and think about why would we want one that's maybe way more fearsome and has way more accumulation, more energy than another one? Yeah?
Why is it washed? Is there a particular reason why the Kono mask is washed?
There is.
Oh, you don't know? Okay.
So this is, we used to call these secret societies. What we actually call these now are restricted societies, because it's not everybody knows that there's stuff going on behind closed doors, right? We just don't know what it is. So it's restricted knowledge, and it's restricted because we don't dance in front of women. No ladies allowed. And there are actually a number of men who've been male researchers, Americans, Africans, who have been initiated into Como societies, specifically Como. But as a part of doing ethical research, they're not going to share what they know if it's not allowed to be shared. And that's good. We don't have to know everything, right? Because knowledge available to everybody is useless. Joel mentioned to me a couple weeks ago, he said, I think we've been a little too modest about the fact that we have this full mask in the galleries. Damn straight. Yes, way too modest. This is very important. If I said that the Chihuahua is decapitated, and by the way, the Como and the Kono are also decapitations, and the people I work with in Burkina Faso call these decapitations, then this is fantastic. We have a full mask with a full body. Now, what we don't have is music, poetry, dance, dust, food, chatter, laughter, okay? But you can't have everything. So, we're gonna take what we can get and say, point to this and say, there's a full mask. And we can talk about what are the differences. What do you see with this full mask? What is the impact of this full mask that we don't get with, say, Como, Kono, Chiwara? With these decapitated headpieces where you're inspecting just the sculptural form of the wood. and not its interrelationship with its accessories, with the rest of the head, with the full body, even though the body itself is not in motion. If everything else is just a headpiece, and this isn't animated, it's kind of our good in-between. So we view objects as things, as commodities, where many African communities view art not so much as things, but as sets of attributes. Attributes that, when they're made skillfully, create an experience, and often an empowering one. Maybe not for everybody, but an empowering one. So art is not necessarily a thing, it's attributes that create an experience. Yeah, I could go on and on about that. So artworks matter not for what they are as created forms, but for what they do. And what I do want to get to this idea of art for art's sake, though. It's a really nice little transition there. If artworks, as I said, artworks matter not for what they are as created forms, but for what they do. That is not to say that African art is functional only. Most objects have to be aesthetically either pleasing or correct to have any kind of efficacy whatsoever. They have to be done well. And this is not so unlike what we see with, say, European art, even Renaissance art. You don't recognize it's Mary unless she's got the blue cloak. It has to be made well and right to be appreciated and to be recognized, okay? And if we like to think of African art as functional, but we can also think of all art as being functional, whether it's psychologically, religiously, politically, socially, functional. And we can think about those things in terms of things like prestige, status, right? History. Those are things that we think about when we think about kind of all arts generally. When we look at this object, and I actually don't know a lot about it, I can say that it's a bird mask. This is monkey hair, by the way. Probably, I haven't inspected it, but probably. These are Calvary shells on the crown here. Calvary shells were, in the past, before the cash economy, they were a form of currency. And they were a form of currency because they come from far away, right? It comes out of the water, right? Out of particularly the Indian Ocean, but other places as well. So it was a kind of trade item. Today, you see people using cowrie shells, not because it's still currency, right? They're not that expensive, but because it speaks to a larger tradition, an illustrious tradition, but also it's a kind of heritage and history. It's a marker of heritage and history and a marker of wealth still, okay? And then people appreciate the color too, the whiteness that comes out of the ocean. So with this object, we can think about human scale. Having the full figure allows us to say, this is a mask on a human scale, meaning a person, an adult human, fits into that mask. And it's scaled as such. Not all masks are, by the way, even if they are worn by humans. You can compare the low relief of the eyes. I don't have a good image, but maybe when we get to gallery I can show you, to the Soe, one of the Soe headpieces. It's in very light relief. There's some modeling on the cheekbones of the wooden headpiece. The face is crowned by the series of cowries. The headdress is appliqué leather, and it has the beard of a monkey. And it wears strip-woven cloth, and you can see there's some loss here, and it is occurring at the seams of where the strips are. This mask combines human and animal forms. It's human scaled, and it wears human clothing. And yet, it is a mask of a bird, with hair of a monkey, right? It has human currency, right? Which is actually, it's a natural product, but it's human currency on the crown here. Appliqué leather is an animal part, right? The hide of an animal, but it's been worked and reworked by human ingenuity and skill. So while otherworldly and clearly not human, this bird mask suggests the civilized village versus, or I should say melded with, the dangerous bush. Does anybody know what the bush is? So you hear this a lot in African studies. The bush is anything that is outside civilized space. Nature, forest, savanna, desert, it's all bush. Because it's not where humans occupy, it's dangerous, it's unbuilt. And village means city, town, settlement, anywhere there's humans, human interaction and human constructions, okay? So our naturalism and abstraction, Are naturalism and abstraction mutually exclusive? Because here I would argue we have both. We have abstraction in the form of this wooden bird face, this bird mask, but we also have some naturalism in the form of the modeling on the cheekbones and the eyes, which you'll see when we go back into the gallery. In what instances might the artist employ both naturalism and abstraction, which we'll also see in the second galleries with Ibeji, and why? What are some other examples in the gallery? Why are some human-like features, or what are some of the human-like features of this mask? What are some of the animal-like features of this mask? Why might it have both? So here we can think about this as a kind of composite object, right? Human and animal, which is not so unlike the Como, which is a composite because it isn't a real being, right? It's this big-mouthed, anti-naturalistic, horned critter face, right? Which is not a real being. And this is a whole mask, right? Which is very exciting.
Why is it a bird? Why is it called bird mask?
It has a very long, it's a bit obscured by the monkey hair, but there's a very long beak, and it comes to not a sharp point, but a beak-like point. Yes, and it's actually articulated as a beak, usually. Like it has a line on it.
Is there a realistic bird that it's representing?
I don't know. So this mask comes from Liberia, and unfortunately, there has been work done in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, but it's been intermittent because there has been a lot of political unrest in those countries, which is really unfortunate. So there are some large studies, but they don't cover every single mask possible, unfortunately. Okay, I want to do one more mask. Oh, darn it. Okay, we're going to skip that one, even though it's really cool. Look at it. Okay, so I want to do this one because it looks unlike the others, yeah? And I'm going to compare it to another object. This is a portrait mask. Probably. I don't actually know that, but I suspect it is. It's very unusual to have naturalistically done masks in ballet country that are not portraits. So this is a portrait of a female, and it would be a kind of entertainment mask. However, while it is an image of a woman in a woman's face, it is danced by a man. Always. Always. Every single mask in those galleries, except 2, are danced by men. And the reason is this. Men dance all wooden masks, except one, which is, you have 2 examples upstairs, the Soe masks, which I'll talk about when we go upstairs. But by far and large, men dance masks in Africa. There are instances in which women dance, but they are almost never wooden headpieces. They're textiles, or they're body coverings, or body paint, or you have an object sitting on the head and the face is shown, or something like that. But anytime you have a wooden mask covering the face, with one exception, it's danced by a man. No matter whether it images a woman, or a man, or an animal, or some other creature, always a man. So, this is a wonderful counterpoint to the idea that abstraction is failure. It's a failure to represent the real world, which is often what has been said about African art, that it's all abstract because they can't make naturalistic art. Not true. So abstraction is a conceptual and creative choice, as is naturalism, okay? So here, this mask has a high forehead, downcast eyes, a slightly parted but basically closed mouth, a very still expression. It is symmetrical, and she has a wonderfully elaborate hairdo, yeah? These are ideal qualities of a modest, calm, poised, beautiful woman. And I think we can all agree with these. Yeah, these are basically good Beautiful attributes, poise. Carefully coiffed hair refers to beauty, personal beauty, but also refinement. The smooth surface is clean, healthy, well-fed, right? Good skin. An idealized countenance is a kind of prime of life, and it's a respectful way to image somebody. What's interesting about these kinds of portrait masks is that likeness to the subject is not necessary to know who the subject is. So often a carver will carve a mask and just name it after such and such person. It doesn't have to look like her exactly. So sometimes it can have an emblem of a person. They don't even have to be naturalistic. Some of them are just very abstract. So this is unusual. Now, while men would dance this mask, women would participate. Women would encourage the mask. Women can come onto the dance floor and dance, but they're not masked. Okay? Women would praise the mask as it's being danced. Women would interact with it like it's the woman it actually images. These would come out for national holidays, funerals of important women, visiting dignitaries, the New Year, tourists. I don't know about weddings. I don't know. Okay, so this is a ballet mask. See how I did that? So the K and the P together, ballet. It's fine. You can just call it the mask for goalie, which is how it's labeled, right, for the goalie masquerade. This is borrowed. So this is ballet people, ballet. So ballet people have this mask. It's borrowed. They didn't steal it. They invited Wam people to come and show them how to do this. So it's borrowed and adapted from their neighbors, Wam people. And it was adapted at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. So between 1900 and 1910, ballet people adapted this mask from their neighbors. So here we have a wonderful example of innovation and adaptation. So this is not one of those great long traditions from time immemorial. This is a dateable, fairly recent masquerade. And what's fascinating is that while this mask and all other masks in ballet country are kind of on the decline, they're just not that popular. This one, which is not invented by ballet people, has become the quintessential ballet masquerade. It's the one you see at like national troops do, you see the dance for tourists, you see even in villages, like this is the one everybody wants to see. It's the most popular and it's increasing in popularity. Okay, so this again sort of defies some of our expectations, I think, about African art. There are 4 masks that come out for goalie. This is the one that is the least prestigious. It has the least difficult dance, and it's considered the least beautiful of all 4 of these masks. However, it's the one that Westerners like the most. And the reason, in part, is because it's the sort of most delightful example of African art, right? It's a very simple form, it's abstract, we love that, and it's, clear. But among ballet, it's just not the most important one. All right, so this has become more public over time, and it has more interaction with women, so it's much more secular than it was when it was first adapted. When we're in the galleries, one of the things you can ask visitors is, how do you think this was worn? Because if you look at it, and we'll take a peek when we go upstairs, it has a really thick collar. It's really deep in the back. And if you look at all the other masks, most of them have little holes around the sides that you tie the raffia netting onto, right? The sort of costume, the body. This doesn't have that. And here's why. Thank God for supplementary images. You wrap the raffia all the way around, and then there's a cape on the back. Obviously the dancer wears a skirt. The dancer's also wearing like a netting. It's kind of like really wide fishnets, and then ankle rattles, and then is wearing raffia at the joints. So this is worn in a way that's a bit unusual, and it's unlike, I think, all of the other masks in the galleries. So you can ask, how is it attached to the dancer's head? There's a bite bar inside. So rather than hold it, which the dancer can do, because by the way, do you see any arms here? Oh, okay. So the dancer can hold the mask, but the real balance is by using the bite bar. Neat, right? And it's carved out of the same piece of wood so that it's not going to come flying off. Yeah?
That greenish-looking thing at the top of the head, at the top of the grassing, that is the head. That is the
This?
Yeah.
Those are the horns. It's just differently articulated than the other one.
So therefore, in the back where the teeth there is a bite bar.
Oh, yeah. It's a little higher up.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not at the teeth.
Okay, it would be around the nose where the nose
Yeah,
is.
and unfortunately, the way it's installed, you can't see it. Okay, so the reason I put these two together is because they're both ballet. Same people. Ha ha ha. So there's this old thing we call one tribe, one style. One tribe, one style does not exist. I can tell you from experience, and I can tell you from just reading things and looking. These are made by the same people, and although this is imported, right, it's an adapted, borrowed masquerade, it's been ballet for 100 and some odd years, yeah? It hasn't changed. Almost not at all, which is fascinating. This, however, has changed enormously, right? Because we went from abstraction to naturalism. So this is a wonderful example that sort of conquers this idea that each people has its own style. Carvers can do wonders, and they can work in a number of styles. And so while these two objects are not necessarily next to each other in the gallery, what a wonderful way to get visitors to sort of think about the fact that artists are actually making choices rather than, say, sticking to the same tradition over, just repeating over and over and over again what their forefathers did. And they have, very different aesthetics. I might also point out that the Chiwara and the Como are also both Bomana. One has that visual clarity, and the other one has that aesthetic of accumulation. So it's another good example. And I guess we probably have to take a break. All right. So this is a hunter's tunic, I think. Yeah, hunter's tunic. And it's a Bomana object, although it's not exclusive to Bomana people. There are hunters' associations all over parts of West Africa, the Mande territory of West Africa. And hunters are men, almost exclusively, who operate knowledgeably in a very, very dangerous place. If the bush is unsettled, unbuilt, no human establishments whatsoever, we can think of it as being basically unsafe because there are wild animals out there. And even if they're not large beasts, scorpions, right? There are all method of things that can hurt you. You could rub up against the wrong plant and get really hurt. And hunters are very knowledgeable about all things in the bush because they operate there to hunt. And so in the past, hunters were also military personnel, and in Bomana territories for most of the Mande world, they participated in the expansion of large empires. And I'm talking about from like the 13th century forward, up until the 19th century, and basically the coming of colonialism. Bomana hunters were military personnel as much as hunters. And they were hunters who would do a couple of things. One is hunt for food, right? Large game for food, to feast or just to feed. But also, in my own experience, even today, and I live in a city in Burkina Faso, hunters also protect. So if you have, as was the case 2 years ago, an elephant who was charging a village, it was in a rural area, the elephant was alone, it was a lone bull, which makes it pissy, and it was charging a village over and over again. It was unsafe because children who just like go out and collect firewood or things like that, they aren't safe. and there aren't walls around towns or anything. So you have to have hunters, specialized people, who can come and fell an elephant. And it's not just anybody, come on, who can come and fell an elephant. So hunters had knowledge of the medicines that could heal them, of how to move around safely, how to fell animals, among other things. So the shirt is, we can think of this as a kind of formal wear. This is not hunter wear, because when you're in the bush, you want to wear something that's sort of lightweight and where you can sort of move about easily. So this is not necessarily what one would wear if one was on a hunt, particularly alone. So this is made from strip woven cloth, and it's the same basic procedure as making this kind of strip woven cloth, even though this is Mali and this is Liberia, right? So they're pretty far apart. And this is a forest zone and this is a savanna zone. But it's basically woven fabric, woven by 3 to 4 inch wide strips, which are then sewn together, usually by a machine, and then formed into the shape of the tunic. In this case, the tunic is then dyed a darker color because it's normally very light, and it's dyed with medicinal plants and things like that. And then each pouch that is attached, and these are leather pouches, inside would have there's a whole array of options. And again, one wouldn't know what is inside unless one made it, because it is the recipe of the person who makes it. So it's probably, you have 3 basic options. One would be amulets like Quranic surah or hadith, right? Islamic poetry, or what we would think of as psalms, right? But surah, written and then bundled up and then wrapped in the leather as a kind of protective device, or a prayer or a blessing. It might be plant matter and medicines on the inside, or it is the remnants of felled animals that has also been manipulated in some way, according to some recipe that the owner has. And then bundled up and attached to the shirt. The dangling portions are also rawhide or leather, probably from animals that this hunter felled. Okay? And then there's a bunch of other objects here. There's a ring, a kind of pendant here, and then I know you guys are going to ask me about this. I have no clue. Okay, I'm just gonna be honest. I don't know why this bundle of thread is here, because it's not as though I can locate anywhere on the tunic. Oops, oh my gosh, the thread has been used. So I don't know why that's what the importance of that was or what the reasoning was. Hunting as a kind of vocation is declined, right? There's no way to make a living as a hunter at this point. So hunters are often blacksmiths who have other work, sort of have day jobs. They could be carvers, artisans. They could be anything. I know hunters who work in the mayor's office, right? Like, it's entirely possible. So you have to go through your training and everything and learn so that you're not stupid and bumbling around in the bush. But if hunting is on the decline now, what that means is that if a hunter has built this shirt over time, right, with each felled animal, then again we have that aesthetic of accumulation, right? We have that aesthetic of accumulation here, right? There's all this stuff here covering the shirt. You can hardly even see the shirt, right? Can you even articulate? There's a pocket there. There's 2 pockets here. Yeah, look at that. Because of all that accumulated matter, okay? So if hunting is on the decline, a sort of novice hunter has a bare shirt. And the more animals felled and the more experience one gets, the more accumulation the shirt will have. And so these are increasingly rare, assuming they're made in that same vein. One can make a hunter shirt quite easily, right, without having to fell all these animals. You just make amulets and get leather and attach away, right? But to have a hunter shirt that actually has all of this, again, nyama, all of that energy, because that's what this is. It's the hide of a felled animal. There's nyama in that. There's nyama in the speech of God, if you're writing down the surah from the Quran. There's nyama in that too. So this is pulsing with energy, and it's telling you that. It's a kind of advertisement, right? And again, if it's formal wear, this guy's strutting around, right? I mean, like, that's something. That really is. And I had, in the PowerPoint, I just didn't get to it, I had an image from Burkina Faso, where I work, where there are Monday hunters. And there were musicians, and there's a whole array of bear shirts to shirts with cowrie shells, and a whole option of attachments that one could do. And there's one with, all of these things on it. And you can see the sort of novice, the neophyte, all the way up to the master, right, the journeyman, And so we can think about the aesthetic of accumulation. We can think about how textiles are used. And by the way, this is displayed basically two-dimensionally, but all of you are wearing textiles, and they're really three-dimensional objects because they are animated and they are operating in the three-dimensional world. They move, it makes noise, right, when it moves and it jangles and things like that. So we can think about what it means to have objects in a museum, what we gain from close looking, and what we lose from not having this performative element, yeah? So on the questions that I gave you, I think I over-determined how I talked about this. And I asked the question, what did I say? Let's see, why might a musical instrument look more like a sculpture, and why might a sculpture act as a musical instrument? And I think I over-determined that. It isn't a musical instrument. It is a sculpture, but it has a function that involves what I think of as music. And actually what's funny is that the word for this is more akin to pestle, as in a mortar and pestle, something that grinds and pounds. So if you do it by hand, it's grinding, but that's not how it's usually used. There, a pestle is pounded. They're enormous things, and you just drop them in. Women, not you gentlemen, women drop them in, and they pound really loudly, and they make this music. That when there are women in a courtyard who are pounding and pounding and pounding, it's gum, 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 right? So it makes this rhythm. And this object would have been used for display at association meetings. So here we have another association, probably Poro, which is a very widespread men's society. It's kind of like a men's initiation and education society. It turns boys into men. And this would have been used for display, and these come in pairs, male-female pairs. And whenever I say pair, it will almost always be male-female, because African art, if nothing else, it educates people. It educates people into right living. And male and female is the way to continue one's community, right? So this sort of heterosexual reproduction is very important. So we're missing the male, but here we have the female, and she is envisioned as a mother. So her breasts are pendulant. She has breastfed, right? Her stomach is slightly swollen, and there are radiating marks coming out of her navel, which draws attention to the umbilicus, right? To the fact that she has given birth. And it's obviously a female form. She is symmetrical. We again have that visual clarity, right, where there are no major attachments, there's no costume for this, right? She's not covered in any way. The form itself is clear. It's symmetrical. It's abstracted, right? And everything except for that one naturalistic mask we've seen is abstract, right? So there's this sort of penchant for abstraction here. And you might notice that the slope of the chin more or less matches the slope of the breast, more or less matches the belly to the hands, and it draws your eyes up and down. It's beautifully done, beautifully done. And if you look at the surface too, it's been a bit, it's had some wear, yeah, and it's probably been buried or pounded into the ground. At a funeral for, say, a Poro leader, one would bring out the male and the female. They would be displayed on the sides of the corpse, which would be wrapped, and it would be not embalmed, it would be bound, kind of, not to be disrespectful, but like a burrito. Like, you wouldn't be able to tell the human form. It would just be a kind of tube, yeah? And it would be covered in cloth, prestigious cloths, right? this would be displayed next to it, and then when the corpse is escorted to the burial site, one would hold these like this. So at this scale, I'm not sure these were actually used, but one would hold it like this and swing them back and forth, and then pound them into the ground, and then keep swinging, and pound it into the ground, and it would make this noise that basically alerts the ancestors, because they too are buried, and they're bringing you another one. Isn't that lovely? Right? Like so-and-so is coming to meet you, right?
Knocking on
Bam! Yeah, it's brilliant. And it's kind of lovely in that way, isn't it? And it's ritual, it's spectacle, it's performance, right? So again, we have this still object that would have been, at certain points, enacted and used and enjoyed with sound and dust and chatter and music, right? Whereas when you guys have visitors here, you'll be going like this. That's not how one engages with the artwork normally, okay? Just keep that in mind. There are smaller versions which are more likely to be actually pounded. These are awfully large and heavy at the scale. So this may have been more used for display. I wouldn't know.
Would they have been destroyed? Pounding them on the ground?
Yeah, you see them just wrecked on the bottom. Yeah. So, I mean, eventually you would have to replace it.
So do you think that's the original pounding part?
Ideally, it's all carved from one log, one piece of wood.
Do they make them?
Yeah.
So this doesn't, probably is in addition, just for display?
No, this is all one piece of wood. Yeah, that's all one piece.
Yeah. It's more polished at the top.
Yes.
Escalates,
Escalates?
like skeletal or skeleton because they're so skinny.
I know.
Years ago in Chicago, Neiman Marcus had a whole display window, and they had several of them. They were all a little different, and they called them escalate pounders.
Yeah, but Westerner, we do whatever the heck we want, don't we? So, I mean, actually, I had this slide for the Cuba Prestige panels there, those cloths, where I had Bonwit Teller and Company, which was a department store in New York at the early part of the 20th century, had, when that genre of Cuba cloth showed for the first time in the United States at the Brooklyn Museum in 1923, Bonwit Teller had dresses made that mimicked Cuba cloth. So it's, I mean, who knows, right? Who knows? So you can find, what's called airport art, like African art, really famous objects anywhere, So, but I've never heard them called skeletons, but these are found, or these are made primarily in French-speaking countries, or former French colonies. So it's possible. Yeah. Somebody else had a question. Written counter question.
Would men be the
Well, it's-
founders?
Say it again.
Would men be the founders?
Yeah, because Poro is a men's association. So
How do
yeah,
you spell that?
P-O-R-O. These are Sowe masks. And these are, they were at one point fairly common in Sierra Leone and Liberia, a tiny bit of Guinea, along the West African coast where the continent kind of goes like this. These are the only full-bodied masks with wooden headpieces that are owned, controlled, and danced by women. Owned, controlled, and danced by women. Okay, and that's saying a lot because a woman can own a mask. By the way, that naturalistic ballet mask of the female that's behind you over there, the woman who it represents would own that mask. Yeah, she doesn't dance it. She can control who dances it and when. She doesn't get to dance it. And this is an occasion where we have all three, the grand triumvirate of owning, controlling, and dancing, masked with wooden headpieces. And they dance these for girls' initiation. So if we have all of these associations of men, Sunday, is it here? No, S-A-N-D-E, Sunday, is an association of women that educates girls. It initiates girls and teaches them to be proper young women, among other things. That is his primary role, is to teach young women. As a female association, it cements bonds
between women over their lifetimes. Once a member, always a member. You might gotta pay your dues, but once you're in, you're in. Okay? And it cements bonds in the sense that if a woman has a problem, and I mean a problem, like a legal problem or a divorce, cattle theft, and the government won't help her, the men's association won't help her, she will go to Sunday. Sunday will help. Sunday will pay your litigation fees if you're getting a divorce. Okay? It's amazing. It's a kind of political tool for women. So it cements bonds and it can be politically active. Meaning, while this is certainly not the primary reason that soe, the mask, comes out, one option is that if, say, a man has sexual relations with a girl is in the process of being initiated or hasn't been initiated, the mask will come out, point him out, and send him to the leaders of that community and have him dealt with. So that it's the mask that does that and not a particular woman, right? Because then nobody's to blame. Why? Because the mask is a spirit. And this is the first time you'll hear me say that. I'm not very fond of calling everything a spirit just because it's African. We tend to do that. And it's intellectually lazy and it's completely inaccurate. So please don't do that. In this case, however, the mask images both an ideal woman. Actually, I should say three things. It images an ideal woman, and I'll show you what those qualities are. It images the medicines possessed by the Women's Association that empower it. And it images the spirit of the Women's Association. So that spirit is Ngatha, and it is a spirit that dwells in the river, the dark waters of the river, and that is also where the medicines that empower this association are found. And when I say medicines, and I've said that a lot, like in packets or, as sacrifice, we use this as a kind of catch-all term, and it's really, anytime there's a recipe for something that is meant to help and protect people, we call it a medicine. And it's a kind of a bland term, but it's what I got, sorry. And it's better than giving you 4 languages left and right, yeah. So if medicines are found near or in the river, where there is this spirit that women, the leaders of Sunday, to which the leaders of Sunday have access and can control, then they put that on display through masquerade. Okay? So in part what this is sort of showing the power of Sunday, this women's association. And the masks come out for a whole slew of reasons. Visiting dignitaries, funerals, the installation of a new mask, but primarily their main job is to come out for girls' initiation. So when girls are initiated, they go into the bush. Now you know what the bush is, so it's dangerous. They're doing things there that are dangerous. And when they are safe, the mask comes out and says, hey, everybody, they're safe. Because if you're, say, an uncle or a brother or an aunt who's from another place, doesn't go to Sunday, you want to know that your family member, your community, the girls in your community, your future women are all okay. And so it's the mask that comes out. Once everybody's okay, the mask comes out and does a quick little tour through the town. When they're ready to come back, there will be a little dance that the mask will do. And when they do come back, there's a big dance that the mask does, okay? Because it's a celebration, it's a coming home. They're no longer girls, they're women. And they are women who've been educated to rear children. They are educated in proper sexual behavior, proper morals. They are educated to sing ritual songs, things that get sung at weddings and baptisms and things like that. They're educated in how to hold themselves and how to work and how to do it well and how to be a good wife, how to be a good mother, right? It's very gendered, okay? And, you know, while we don't have anything really comparable here, these are all desirable qualities, right, for heterosexual women, right? This is very based in a heterosexual world.
How would the girls be?
So you go into Sunday when you hit puberty.
Okay, so there you go.
Well,
Stay in the bush.
puberty.
I know.
Okay, so that's a great question. So it used to be that Sunday took years. However, over the past, say, 40 to 60 years, what you see is Sunday accommodating school breaks, Easter, spring break. Yeah, so it can be done in a matter of weeks. It's less grueling, and I was debating whether or not I was going to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you. So one of the reasons that the girls are not safe in the bush is because they go through excision, which is otherwise called female circumcision, female genital mutilation. And it has a corollary in Poro. So boys get circumcised in Poro and girls get called excised in Sunday. And it used to be, right in the old days, you would do it out in the bush, and it's incredibly dangerous. I mean, same thing with circumcision. Boys died, and then the masks couldn't come out. I mean, it's just awful. What you see more often than not, and take this with a grain of salt, because this is Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea, where there's not been a lot of work done in the last 20 years, right? There's not been a lot of research. The tendency is to send the girls to a clinic and then have it done there, and then go back into the bush and have all of the other sort of attendant rituals, right, that go through with it. And so the girls might go through other sort of rigorous stages and phases, right? You have to sort of conquer this kind of endure this physical trauma to come out on the other end a woman, right? So that's one of the reasons that the mask comes out, is because if the girls are in real mortal danger, with a really elaborate hairdo, which suggests refinement, but also social skills. These are actual hairdos. And these are the least elaborate hairdos that you'll see on a Sunday mask. You will see some amazing hairdos. And it takes hours, possibly days, and you need multiple women to help you make a hairdo like that. So that suggests that you have the sort of cultural capital and the social skills to have your friends do that with you, right? To invest in you like that. And these are not these are special hairdos, right? This is not a daily wear situation. They have downcast eyes, modest, right? Closed, tiny mouths, because they don't gossip. Yes. The rings around the neck. By the way, you might look at me, I'm very beautiful in this part of the world. I have these lines on my neck. I'm not kidding. These are not fat ripples. These are signs of health and refinement. Thank you. It's not for corpulence, although it's exaggerated here. This is the sign of a healthy, fit woman who could bear children, not a dry, barren, scrawny woman. Nobody wants a dry, barren, scrawny woman. This is the way it's described in the literature. I'm just passing it on. And neither is corpulent desirable. So somewhere in between. But these lines suggest health. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. I want to point out these marks here on this particular mask have marks below and on the eyes, yeah? What's fascinating to me. So these are called Mende. These have both been identified as Mende. It's an ethnic group. There are many, many people who have Sunday, who have these Soe masks. Sherbero, Bulum, Temna. There's just tons and tons, like maybe 8, right? Mende don't scar. Well, there's one group of Mende that scar, but most Mende don't. So why are these scarification marks on this mask? Many reasons, many possible reasons. One, carvers think it's pretty. So men carve these. So a Sunday chapter will commission a carver, one they like, one that's local, whatever the circumstances allow. The carver might think it's pretty. The carver might not know. The carver might have been trained somewhere else and says, hey, this is how I do it, right? It could also be the sign of the exotic of the foreign, right? How many people do you know with some Asian language tattoo that they don't know what it means, or it's probably the wrong thing, or something like that? Because it's exotic and it means something to them that maybe it doesn't mean over there. And that's absolutely what we see here. There have been hundreds of carvers, and there is an enormous variety of styles for these Soe masks. If you, seriously, just Google it, you will find I was going to show you one where the mask has a pith helmet on top and 2 pistols on the side of the head. I'm not kidding. Amazing, right? I mean, there's an enormous variety for these masks. But you can tell that all of these features sort of speak to either the ability of the carver or the physical features and the character of the woman, right? The ideal woman who emerges from Sunday, yeah? Do you guys have questions about?
Just real quick, the initiation, is it several days that they spend in this process?
So nowadays it's several weeks. It used to be months or years. Now it's several weeks. Yeah. And so, you know, what we have here is both, again, abstraction and naturalism, right? Where like the neck is really abstracted. The facial features are kind of abstracted, right? The slits for eyes and things like that. But you have some naturalism, particularly with the hair, right? That hair is like spot on, okay? That hair is on point. That is what it looks like, okay? Wow. Yeah, thank you. Because I think so too.
Yeah.
Before I talk about the Shango objects, I do want to speak to the question about why Yoruba. So Joel asked me, he said, you know, why are Yoruba so important in African art? And in the catalog, and I think there's on the plaque here, Herbert Cole, who curated the show, says that they're the largest and most artistically prolific group in Africa. I don't know that that's true, but what is true is that Yoruba people are numerous. There are something with 40 to 50 million Yoruba people living in Nigeria and the country of Benin. They comprise, it's like, I don't know, a third of Nigeria, which has half the population, more than half the population of the United States. And they are a kingdom. So it's a strong hierarchy. And we like that, right? We like seeing that kind of strong hierarchy. There's a sense also among African Americans that Yoruba is a lofty and sort of a good ethnicity that because they have been successful in the contemporary terms, are very fond of education and educating their children, are competitive, and often are the leaders of society. And in part this is because they're so numerous and they're dominant, right? And like most Nigerians, they're about half Christian, half Muslim. But there's also this sense that because of the vast variety of artworks that we see in Yoruba communities, that there's enough differentiation as well that one can look at Yoruba life and Yoruba culture and say, it's not all the same, right? That there's so much diversity within it, that this is very appealing. In the early part of the 20th century, and the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, Egypt was where before they were called African Americans, looked to find a sort of lofty civilization in Africa, a place with history, a place with hierarchy, a place that's recognizable as something that is good and important, right? A place that affected the rest of the world positively, yeah? And that we've moved away from that for a number of reasons, in part because there's been so much research done. And Yoruba is one of the populations with the most research. They are their own researchers, so there are a number of Yoruba scholars. There's one at VCU named Babatunde Lawal, who is on your bibliography because he writes very well about Yoruba. Roland Abiodun is at Amherst. He writes about Yoruba, he's Yoruba. But there have also been American and European scholars who've done an enormous amount of work in Yoruba territory. So we know a lot, and we have this huge history too. Here in Charlotte, Akin Ogundaran, who's the head of Africana Studies, he's Yoruba, and he writes on Yoruba groves, and he does wonderful work as well. So while there's this enormous...
Where's he? When
Charlotte.
In Charlotte?
Yeah.
Oh, at one institution?
Oh, UNC Charlotte.
Yeah, okay, all right, okay.
So while there's an enormous array of Yoruba works, I'm going to talk about these two Shango Ibeji figures. Do you have the little education ones
I
on
don't
you?
have the little education,
Okay.
but stay tuned. These are we'll make these available.
Yeah.
Props.
Okay. So these are called Eri Ibeji. Eri means sacred image, and Ibeji means twins, I guess. Two-born. And they're a male and female pair. Look at that, another male-female pair. And Ariabeji so Yoruba have the highest twinning in the world. Yoruba have the most twins of any other community in the world. In the United States, it's something like 16 out of every 1,000 births is a twin, right? In Yoruba territory, it's somewhere between 40 and 60.
Well,
So, if both twins were to die, that's the case here, one would commission 2 figures, whether they are fraternals or identical twins, they will look alike. And the reason is because they are physically 2, but spiritually 1, right? And we want to show that. So, here you have a male and a female, and they are imaged as adults. And we know this because the male has a full penis, and the female has full breasts. Right? And they also have adult hairstyles, right? Which, by the way, do match, and they're covered with indigo. These figures, if you look at the surface, are very smooth, yeah? And there's some, like, accumulation and debris in some of the cracks, and that's from having been powdered, right? So you would be oiled and powdered, just like a baby, right? And camwood powder is red, and it makes the skin nice and pretty and has a luster to it, yeah? And so that's what would have been rubbed on the twins, on the Ibeji. And then the face and some of the surfaces have been eroded away, and that's from being caressed and loved and touched and held and wrapped, yeah? And so these are active memorials. You engage with them, right? You sing to them and all of these other things. Now, if I said a few minutes ago that Yoruba are almost half, it's really more Muslim than Christian, but more or less, lots of Muslims and Christians. Ibeji are not so common anymore. But what do you do with an object that has the soul of your deceased child in it or your deceased twin? What happens often now is they can get sold, they can be deconsecrated and sold into collections. I mean, there's a whole number of ways to get objects into museums. One of the other things that happens is there are people, usually women, who do this as a living, is you will give them the Ibeji, the Eri Ibeji, and give them a small kind of stipend, and they will take care of it for you. And then you don't have to sort of engage with that directly in order to practice your religion, right? Which is pretty reasonable, I think. Yeah. And you'll see that these are adorned. They have necklaces, beaded necklaces, and waist beads on them.
Why are they portrayed as adults?
Because that's the way we wanted them to be.
Oh, we wanted them to grow
Yeah.
up, so consequently.
Yeah, and when 2 die, you want them reborn to the same mother, because twins are a blessing. So we would love to have twins, yeah. So if the woman is going to get pregnant again, right, one hopes for twins. And well, I mean, not everybody, but it's a blessing, right? And so we want them to be together again and come into this world, yeah.
Are they standing on platforms, or are those the shoes?
They are articulated as sandals, but they are meant to elevate the twins. Yeah. Yes.
Could you repeat the statistics on U.S. twins and?
It's about 16 twins to 1,000 births in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And it's somewhere between 40 and 60 in Yoruba land.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. It's pretty impressive. Yeah. Yeah.
When a live twin who's been carrying around this effigy of the dead twin passes away, does that effigy go with that twin to the grave?
It's possible. I mean, there's a whole host of options. It could be anything. Yes, one could be buried with a twin, absolutely. It could be deconsecrated, it could be sold, which is more likely now. It could go into another shrine, like be given to somebody to go into a shrine. It could stay in the family. That's all individual choice. There's no rules to these things, right? There's nothing that says, well, you have to do it this way, right? There's, pressures and expectations, just like anything else, that you feel like you should do something, but maybe it's not right for you, and yeah. Does that make sense? A little wishy-washy of an answer, sorry. Any other questions?